Good evening, everyone. I am Stephanie Owino, Associate at Large and Co-Chair of the Michigan ASLA Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. I am joined here today with my Co-Chair, Member at Large, Kyle Versman. We would like to welcome you all to the 2020 Michigan ASLA Virtual Conference on Landscape Architecture. The Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and the Design Arts Turning Conversation into Action webinar with Damon Leverett. Before we begin, I'd like to briefly go over a few housekeeping items. This event qualifies for 1.5 CEUs. To receive your continuing education credits, you must be present for the live event in its entirety and participate in the event evaluation quiz that will be available via a link at the conclusion of this event. You must answer 8 out of 10 questions correctly to receive a passing score. Within 1 week following the event, you will be emailed instructions to download your CEU certificate. During the conference, please ask your questions in the QA box below. Our presenter will address these during the event. Lastly, a recording of the webinar will be shared with you all after the event. Please know this will be available to view for 5 business days.
And to kick off this event, we want to say a big thanks to all of our valued sponsors, Victor Stanley, Landscape Forms, Unilock, Anova, Oaks Concrete Products, and Rainbird Corporation, without whom we would not be able to put on events like this. So a big thanks to them. Stephanie, why don't you introduce our speaker for the evening? Will do.
Damon Leverett is a senior lecturer and adjunct instructor at the College of Architecture and School of Information at the University of Arizona. Formerly with the American Institute of Architects, he served as managing director for the Workforce Development and Strategy from 2013 to 2019 at the National Office in Washington, D.C. His responsibilities included engaging membership in the areas of equity, diversity, and inclusion, emerging professionals leadership, as well as higher and K-12 education. Damon has over 30 years of experience working in the architecture and design industry as a principal, lead designer, and instructor. He served as adjunct lecturer at Lawrence Technological University College of Architecture and Design from 1990 to 2001, and was visiting lecturer at Architectural Design at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign from 2012 to 2013. Damon holds a Master of Fine Arts degree in Web Design and New Media from the Academy of Arts University in San Francisco, and is currently the 2019 to 2020 Board of Directors for the National Architectural Accrediting Board, known as NABA. Originally from Detroit, Michigan, Damon has former associations with the firms of Albert Kahn Associates, Smith Group, and EYP. He is a licensed architect in Arizona and Michigan and currently resides in Tucson, Arizona.
So in this session, we will discuss strategies for how an organization can translate concerns and conversations about equity, diversity, and inclusion and translate them into action. These strategies include specific steps groups may take, but more importantly emphasizes the importance of encouraging participants to commit to a purpose-driven engagement. Areas of focus include EDI committee governance, statistical assessment, brainstorming, and implementation. Damon will draw from examples and experience in working with groups at the American Institute of Architects and with students at the National Organization of Minority Architects. Real quickly before Damon begins, we're going to hear a brief message from a couple of our sponsors, Victor Stanley and Landscape Forms.
Hello, dear friends. It's a pleasure for Victor Stanley to once again participate in your chapter events, where we invariably learn so much about landscape architecture in Michigan and elsewhere. However, there's another reason why we are so keen to work with your chapter, and that is that in the 58 years in which we've been in business, Victor Stanley has made so many close friends in the landscape architecture community. And the older I get, the more important are those friendships. And I think you'll all agree that the name of the game is to keep getting older. We hope that you and your families are well. And the encouraging word now is that despite all the gloom and doom of the past many months, there has been meaningful business activity, which is now increasing in scope. From all of us to you, we wish you the very best. Stay well.
Now more than ever, outdoor space is vital to our well-being, and Landscape Forms is here to help designers harness its life-enriching benefits. Outdoor spaces give us the power to safely create, learn, heal, to refresh, stay healthy, and think. We know that getting outside, especially now, enriches lives. That's why we've developed insights, ideas, and solutions to help designers plan and create a variety of safe outdoor spaces. From college, healthcare, and corporate campuses, to transit, living, and recreational sites. When the time is right, we'll be back at school, back in the office, and back at the park. And when that time comes, safe and confidence-inspiring outdoor spaces will be more important than ever. When the time is right, we'll see you outside. And in the meantime, be inspired at landscapeforms.com.
Okay, we're ready to get started?
Yep.
Oh, very good. Well, first of all, I wanted to thank the American Society of Landscape Architects Michigan chapter for inviting me here today. And specifically, thank you to Stephanie, Kyle, and Lauren, and Wendy for connecting with me and giving me an opportunity to share some of the ideas about equity, diversity, and inclusion, the experiences I've had working with architects, and hopefully contributing to a brighter future in terms of our work and working with each other. So if you just give me a second here, I'm going to share my screen. Everybody can see my screen in good shape? It's always good to ask that first.
Yep,
okay, thank you very much. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about equity, diversity, inclusion as a framework for engagement. I'm going to talk a little bit about the really intense experience with the AI Equity Committee and the initiative we launched in 2015 all the way through 2019 during my tenure there, and the accomplishments we were able to develop during that time. And then I'm going to talk just a little bit about what I'm doing right now with NOMA students at University of Arizona School of Architecture. I think the important thing is that in talking about diversity and inclusion and working with different groups, every association, company, or school are all different. And there's no one size fits all for this kind of conversation. And certainly it may be different from landscape architecture and its association members as compared to architects or other groups I've worked with and talked to, such as the civil engineers. I've talked to them, and a variety of other professional organizations that are within this built environment, arts that we are all involved in one way or another. So I think that there's always different things. So my focus here is really about threefold. It's who we are and how we work together. And that has to do with discrimination and what happens in the workplace and things like that, things that happen to us or things that we see happen to others. The other aspect is important to the people who are in the design arts like us, is that how we contribute to society. What are the things that we do in our professional lives, our projects, our interaction with clients, governments, and so forth? How do the things we do can make a better world in the built environment in society? And then how we share and lead and advance others. So it has to do with what we understand as positive interactions and activities in diversity and inclusion, and then how do we take that and lead others and share it with young people so they can be leaders in the future in it as well. So that's kind of the sort of backdrop of what I wanted to talk about. And there are many other focuses there. Certainly for people in the tech industry, it's a totally different focus. People who are in healthcare, it's a totally different focus. But in the design arts, these are the three things I try to focus on because we have such a big impact on the built environment and our decisions and our working with clients, programming, whether it's making suggestions or working with cities and counties. They're listening to us. And I think that's important for us to know that we have a big impact on how things are constructed in the built environment. And our lens through EDI is going to be important in that respect. So starting with framework for action-driven EDI engagement, there's several items on the side here: vision statement, issue identification, goals and objective, analysis, prioritization, implementation, strategy, measure, and closeout. You know, if we've all been in facilitation, and many of us here are facilitators in our work every day, so some of these terms are not unfamiliar. I think that, again, when we think about the sort of custom thinking about design arts and what we do, I've selected different ones I think that are effective in working in EDI in our industry. And these are the ones I use the most. There are other methods, there's other strategies for facilitating, but I think these are the ones that I've seen have worked the most. So the first thing we always try to do is to envision. So we want to, first of all, state our belief. Really important. What do you believe in? Express commitment. You need to make sure that it says something that we're committed to doing something. That it inspires. You know, I wish I could highlight all of these in red because they're really all important. Inspire is something that often is forgotten when we talk about a mission. We want to inspire people to lead, and then that's really important in that conversation. Not to equivocate. Equivocating is really something that I've seen a lot in the last 9 to 10 months. We want to say one thing and mean what we say, as opposed to saying one thing and meaning something else or trying to be equal to something else. It causes confusion. It sometimes causes anxiety and even causes anger when we try to equivocate. We have to really mean what we say. And to make sure we're not creating a distraction to something, we're not creating an issue that is a distraction to something that's really important. And so that's really a concern. And then also, most importantly, we have to be authentic. People won't believe us if we don't write and say things that are meaningful and that we're committed and that we're authentic in saying it. And that's really highly. So I actually have searched the internet often, and I just did this for our university where we did an exercise where everyone went on the internet to find 3 diversity statements that they felt were effective or had meaning to them. And, you know, we were able to put together about 30 of these with a variety of people. And the one I tend to go back to is Under Armour, and they have a diversity statement that I think resonates with me. And one of them is, as I said before, is right away they say, "We believe." So right away they're beginning to talk about what their belief is. And then they're making a commitment with deliver the most innovative products that make athletes better. It's just something like, this is our business and this is how we relate to the people who are part of our business. So they get to it. They also make a commitment by saying we have a plan. So there's a plan. And then every teammate is engaged, feels a sense of belonging. So that's the part that has to do with a little bit of inspiration, also making people feel that they're all part of the same effort and that we're all in it together. The next part of this process is identification of issues. So this is the brainstorming part that a lot of us are familiar with in the design arts and the built environment. We do a lot of this activity. It's a little different that in a sense that you have to be open to all commentary, and sometimes it can be difficult to listen to it It's difficult for people to talk about it, and some people don't want to talk about certain aspects of diversity and inclusion, and we have to provide a safe environment and make them feel comfortable that everyone can be heard. So that's a little extra in terms of facilitation that we need to make sure we do that. Sometimes it's better to use smaller groups because people feel less threatened in smaller groups and they're more likely to share. All ideals matter, even the ones that are outliers. Focus on questions, not the issues per se. Focus on the questions and the issues and not necessarily the solutions. So you don't want to jump to the solutions first. Keep them separate. And richer ideas sometimes come in a shorter time frame. So if you were talking about diversity and inclusion and you had one issue to talk about, 10 minutes might be enough to talk about one issue. 5 might be enough. But if you stretch it out to 30, you're not going to get more information. And sometimes it just gets harder to deal with that. So I would say shorter information. And focus on data wherever it's available. This is really a critical one. And I've watched this happen in a lot of different places. Groups will jump into this conversation of EDI, and it's just, I'll just say it just starts off as talk. So what's available for data out there? Is there a survey? Is there a research paper? Get everyone on the team to collect as much as you can find on the topic that you're interested in. Sometimes it's books, it's excerpts, it's research papers that you can gather and collect all that information and digest it so that the team will be informed before they start this journey. The next thing is we always talk about goals and objectives. I've been talking about that since the late 80s. We've been talking about what are goals and objectives. Well, the important thing is to discuss the major issues and to find out if there are any categories of issues. So if you could have a list of 100 issues that matter, if you can categorize into that are important, then you might have only 5, 6, 7 categories of issues, and it makes this much more digestible. And I have a specific thing to talk about digesting all of this and how that's actually done. Determine the ultimate achievement. What is sort of the what, and what are you actually trying to achieve? Consider objectives that will contribute to the goal, and visualize what the ideal state is. So that's a really important factor. What is the perfect situation? What is going to make things work? And so I'll try to give some examples as I go along. If you're having students in college or minorities and they're having difficulty graduating, they had no problem getting into school, but all of a sudden they're having financial problems. Visualizing an ideal state is that if we can provide interim scholarships to help them close the gap for their pay, then that's actually a goal. We can visualize an ideal state. They do that, and then they can graduate. So that's what I mean. Well, what is the ideal state? Graduation is the ideal state. What can we do to make that state happen? Well, list 5 things, and one of them happens to be provide interim scholarships as a way to do that. So that's what I mean by setting up some goals that we can get our head around. Now, here's another critical portion here. What kind of goals? And like I said, I've done a lot of conversations about management, project management, EDI. We've all been through it a lot of times, but here are the ones that I felt that worked the best. It's called SMART goals. Whenever we're creating a goal, they need to be specific, they need to be measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely. If you follow those specific criteria for establishing goals, you're going to have a greater opportunity for success, because if it's not specific, no one knows where you're going later. It might come out in a conversation, but it's so vague that it's not understandable. If you can't measure it, you don't know if you've succeeded or not. So that's really important. It needs to be achievable. Is it costly, or is it something that's a big obstacle? Is there a political issue, or can we resolve some of those things? Is it achievable? Is it relevant? That people who are constituents are going to want to know if it's relevant. That's really important. And is it timely? Can we do it in 1 year? Can we do it in 3 years? Can we do it in a month? These are the things that we need to evaluate when we create these goals, and that's part of being smart. Achievable is another aspect. I just want to touch on that for a second, and that has to do with, for example, when I worked at the AIA, I was reading a document when I got there, and it said something, we're going to increase the number of minority architects by 20% next year. Okay. Is that achievable? Is more achievable, can I increase by 1% every year for the next 5 years? Then I can increase by 5%, and that might be more achievable. Because if you don't back up that achievement with all the things we have to do to make it happen, then it causes people to lose faith in the effort, and they start to drop off because they know they can't achieve something. So that's why that's an important aspect of that. Analyze. It's important to then take the information, identification of issues, goals and objectives, and start to analyze them. Formalize issue categories. As I said before, you might have 100 issues, but they all are in groups. Organize issues, in, as I said, in respective categories. Discuss the weighting of issues. Some issues are actually more important than others inherently, so it's very obvious that they are, so that you can begin to build a hierarchy eventually. Here's another thing I think is really important in understanding different facilitation in regards to other matters versus equity, diversity, inclusion, and that is understanding the impact. Everybody wants to know that whatever we're talking about, it's going to have an impact. Because if it doesn't, you're going to also, then the same thing is going to happen. You're going to have people beginning to drop off. They're going to lose interest. The passion will start to wane. So you want to measure priority by their impact on issues and problems, and then go back and test them against the goals and objectives. So it's really important that whenever we come up with issues, goals, and objectives, we always go back and check them back and forth to make sure that we need to make any adjustments. Do we need to poll more people? Do we have maybe a new ideal has emerged in that process? So it's always good to go back and forth. So based on that, the method that I've used in my experience that has worked the best is to get groups to think about an impact analysis. And there are many forms of this four square. Some of them are based on some people call it likelihood / impact analysis. And there's a variety of these that are used. I've seen some designers use them in terms of feasibility versus design excellence. You know, there's lots of ways to do this. But I've used severity and impact. So you have an issue or a problem that needs to be addressed. Then what you do is you measure on the left going up from 1 to 5 in severity, and then on the right in impact from 1 to 5 on that. And then you have these targets that you can identify, like up in the upper right hand corner. And the object here is to get as many ideas in the upper right hand corner as possible. Maximum, if they have maximum severity, means we need to address it. And if it has maximum impact, means that whatever we do, now again, impact is the change that we propose will have the greatest impact if implemented. And that's what I mean by impact. So what we do will have an impact. That's how that works. So if I say scholarships for people who are struggling in the middle of school, disadvantaged groups and so forth, then it is something like, yeah, that's really impactful if I can get them interim scholarships. Or it is also a severe problem because we need more minorities in the field and we need to help. So that's actually how it ends up in box 4. And you can look at every issue you have and somehow place it on this scatter orientation here and have an insight really on what are the problems that are the highest priority through this analysis. So today we're gonna break this up 3 times, and I'd like a little participation from everyone in the chat area. And I'd like everyone, we're gonna take 10 minutes, so it's 3:25, and we're gonna just come back at 3:35. Identify concerns and issues related to just and equitable form of retail in communities. a equitable form of retail and community. Visualize what retail of the future will look like. And this comes from my observation of both Ferguson, Baltimore, and Minneapolis. The relationship between the community and retail, commercial space in times of strife and conflict, and I don't need to describe what happened this summer. So in my view as an architect, I'm thinking about what went wrong with that? Why is retail the victim of really damage in these scenarios? Maybe there's something different as designers we can do. And it has to do with a just society. Are we listening? Is something we design inherently different that we can think of? Something wonderful. Think of it totally positive. What could we change totally positive? So I want you to identify as many issues as you can, write down as many as you can, and I will try to actually record them so that we can, I'll be watching the chat as we do this, and I'll try to record them as quickly as possible. So this is normally in a conference, you would go off to a separate room and have a confab and come back and report. We're not going to do that today, but I'm going to do it differently and kind of do it on the fly. So starting right now, I want everybody to go ahead and start putting their ideas on what is the future of retail through the lens of equity, justice, diversity, and inclusion. Started off slow, but it's really taken off now. Okay, we'll get taking a few more. We'll stop in about a minute. I think I need 2 people over here doing this, writing this down. Okay, the rest of them I'll pick it up after there'll be a chat log at the end, and I'll be able to pick them up. So the walkable will be the last one. One more. Thank you. Wow. This is the kind of stuff that gets me really excited about being in the design arts and the built environment and all that, because it's amazing what the energy we have and what we can contribute. And just now we just came up with, let me count how many we have. 24, 26, about 30 issues and ideas that there's about 30 ideas here already. And a lot of them had to do with grocery stores, and that's a really interesting one. So if I'm not going to do all of these, but the ones that have to do with groceries, we would, there's one about smell. Let's see, where's another grocery one here? There's one about transportation. We'll make that orange. And access. So those two, we would group those two together. Access to food. So actually we'll make this one blue. So anything that has to do with the food, we would make blue. If you could see what I'm doing now, then eventually stores return profit. We'll make that one blue because that's about stores. So we start grouping. So this is what I meant by grouping. So the point I also wanted to bring up is that once you find out, this is how you find out what your major categories are. You just don't think of them ahead of time. You actually get to this point and it becomes very obvious what the major categories are. And most people never miss the point on that one. We might miss the point on maybe an issue or two are here. And the reason why that would happen is because the constituent, more or less, is not in the room, may not be in the room, because most of us, I believe, here are the practitioners and the professionals. But if we start to go into neighborhoods and start asking them, it would be many of the same, but then there will be a ton of cards that are totally different that we never thought of. And then when you put those two together, then you would really have the beginnings of a series of issues that you can build solutions from, and that's really the key. So thank you for that. That was really nicely done. Thank you very much. Okay, so once we, as I said, once we have the issues that have been collected, we've done the research at this point, we've identified things, we know our mission and then our goals are, then we want to find out what the priorities are. And so we want to consider issues and concerns that are high impact and severity. We talked about that. Determine which issues, which ones should be done first, second, and third. That's important. What is the low-hanging fruit? Sometimes some issues, I do recommend that some issues are either because they're in progress or they're so easy to correct that you really should do those first because they happen very quickly. So we have to know what those are, and low-hanging fruit is sort of a a term that's not the best way to describe it, but it basically is the easiest thing that can be done quickly. Importantly, priorities should not be driven by the fastest, cheapest, easiest. A lot of times what happens is when we do issues analysis, we will pick the ones that are the least expensive sometimes, or sometimes the easiest, or the ones that have the least resistance. But in the planning process, it's really important to pick the ones that are most impactful and try to come back to deal with achievability and feasibility, and try to deal with that at some other point. But in other words, if you let ease be the driver, then you might miss the most important thing you want to deal with. So it's easy to do that, but it's important to try to resist that drive. Also keep in mind that, and I recently read an article when someone talked about EDI development, how sometimes we create long lists and that we never get to the ones at the bottom. And he was really right about that. But the thing is that the best way to get most of what you've done is sometimes important, because if you go down the path of planning and you get nothing done, then what's the worst evil? Did you get nothing done, or you at least got 5 things that are highest priority? Society, I believe, will benefit more if we get as much as we can as possible. And we may never have the ability to accomplish everything we want to do, but we can accomplish as much as we can. The things that we cannot do, we will park those items. And park is not a negative term. It means we're going to place it somewhere in a holding pattern. We're either going to do it when we finish the primary priorities, or we're going to do it at a later date, say in 2 years or in 3 years. But we're going to keep it on the list, and it stays on the list forever until it's done, but it's just parked temporarily. So the next part is the implementation or do. So you want to develop a plan for implementation. You always want to have one person responsible for each of the selected items that you've decided to tackle. And this is important because if you just say we're going to do these, if you have 10 people in the room and you say we're going to do these 5 things, 5 people have to be in charge of one of those things each. Otherwise, it won't happen. So it's important to assign someone, or as sometimes we refer to in boards as a charge, that they're responsible to making sure they shepherd those particular issues and see them to their resolution. It's also important to create smaller groups. I hate to use the word subcommittee because we're all on these things and we have subcommittees and then subcommittees, and it seems like everything's in committee and it doesn't get done. So you need to create a smaller group. So if you have a group of 20, you want to create a group of 3 to work with the leader in order to get those things done, because usually the leader cannot do it by themselves. And that is a discouraging point sometimes. If you are assigned a very difficult particular issue and you can't get to it, you may begin to wane and the issue won't get completed. The other thing is to create a time frame and be specific. So in the example of AIA, we actually decided to do 9 things in 3 years. 3 the first year, 3 the second year, and 3 the third year. By the end, those 3 years goes by very fast, and next thing you know, you've accomplished 9 things. So it's really a very effective way, I feel, in order to get things done. Part of that is developing a strategy and implementation. And this is an analogy that's been used a lot in discussion in EDI, but I decided to share it here because it's so relevant. Equity, diversity, and inclusion is a big concern. It's a social, economic element of our world, and it's big. As we've seen, it's all over the country. It's in every city. It's in every state. It's all over the world. It's a big, big topic. And so it may seem like we're trying to eat an entire whale, but the reality is if you eat the whale 1 fork at a time, you'll actually get to the end of the whale at some point. And so that's the analogy there, is we have to try to take it apart, part by part, moving forward, and eventually we'll be able to take care of that. And that's part of our strategy. In the strategy part, you consider funding. This is at this juncture, you consider funding. Are there obstacles in the way? How do you manage the obstacles? So you have to create a strategy for that. And align your allies. This one, I should have bolded this. Getting allies to rally behind our cause, our objectives, our goals, and our mission is critical to helping create a successful engagement in EDI. You really need to create allies. Even if you have a group of 3, grow that 3 to 9, and you'll find that it'll be a lot easier to get to the end point, which is hopefully a successful outcome. The next one is to measure, and this one is actually, I find, the most difficult. And so I have to kind of put it in context of a couple of examples and analogy here. In most facilitation, we're all aware of you need to measure what's happening. So, for example, if you're doing an environmental study of an office building, you can measure the satisfaction of all the employees in there in terms of temperature by basically polling them, but you can't do it once. You have to do it every week for 6 months. Once you collect that data, then you can measure if the comfort level is higher. You can find the number. If it's 1 to 10 and all of a sudden it went from 7 to 9, then you've measured that. So that's a measurement. In social science, it's a little harder. It's not as simple as taking a poll all the time. So we have to be creative in coming up with ways to measure things. So consider carefully what to measure. Measure an incremental progress and the goal together. So you're trying to measure what's happening incrementally and how does it compare to the goal. And you're seeing if the goal is being met at the same time. You have to be realistic when you do this, and survey and collect data as a way of doing it also. So this is one of the most interesting conversations I've had in working in this field the last 7 years, and having an opportunity to really work with professional researchers and people who do surveys for a living. And I've learned a lot in that experience, and they've introduced me to some ideas I've never even thought of. But one of the things I want to give you an analogy about is, say, for example, what is the impact of K through 12 intervention in the design arts as it relates to, say, licensure? So it could be landscape architecture and then getting a license in landscape architecture. Well, if you start at junior high, that might be 15 years from point A to point C. We'll call it point C. And how do you measure that? Well, you could try to survey them, but in the business of statistics, they refer to this as a longitudinal study. So a longitudinal study is done a lot. There was a recent one done on Mensa students and their scores when they were 10, and now they've measured them when they are 70. So that's 60 years, that's a longitudinal study. So you could try to track young people and find out if the programs and solutions that we create have a definite impact at the ultimate goal point at the end, which is either a more participation in the field or more promotions in your workplace or less vandalism in the or something that happens in the long term. It's difficult to study. So in order for me to work through that with groups I've worked with, we've discussed what we call the transitive property. And this is still a work in progress for me, so forgive me if it's still a little wonky in the way it's said, but I'll try my best to explain it. But simply, if A equals B and B equals C, A equals C, because that's the only way you can manage some of these things. If I talk to someone who's 13 years old and I introduce them the notion of what architecture is, I would have to come back 15 years later to find out if it had an effect on them. So if I cannot do that, then I need to find a transitive way of understanding whether that's working. So if I know that 13-year-old and I introduce them to architecture and they never knew what architecture was, then I find out a few years later that they've enrolled in drafting in high school, then I know that there's some cause and effect there. Or if I know they've actually applied for a university program in architecture. That only might be a couple years away. I might be in contact with their parent, or I might be in contact with them. I can find out a little more about their progress and whether or not that intervention or solution is having an impact on that person. So that I know that's an A and B. That's what I call a sort of principled approach. We know that the principle is if I have something to say that's positive and they engage in it, then we know positively that they've enacted on that suggestion or they've moved forward or not. And if they have not, then that tells us something too, that it's not working or our approach is wrong. So that is our A equals B. So now I can find out through someone else, not that same person, in the same time frame, which is in the here and now, right now, that a person in college who got a scholarship was able to finish college, eventually apply for the exam, take the exam, and pass it. So that's my B equals C scenario. So we can draw some correlations between our impactful engagement in college and university, maybe increasing the numbers of minorities and underrepresented communities in those environments, and we find out that they have gone on to get licensed. Well, I now know that B equals C. Well, if I can make a notion and have faith in the fact that those two scenarios are working well, I may be able to infer that now A equals C. In other words, those interventions in junior high school are resulting in more people getting licensed at the back end in C. That is the only way to do that, because one of the obstacles in measuring young people is we cannot have their data. They're minors, and that sort of thing is not normally allowed. So it's difficult for the average person to do. They are allowed in certain scenarios in scientific research just by universities if certain conditions are met. But that's not available to all of us. So we are cut off sometimes from these longitudinal understandings, and we must find correlations in this sense, in this transitive property is a way to do that. It's just one way. You may find a different way to do that, but this is one I've used to convince people that K through 12 can be a catalyst for that work. And there's a couple of great people, Michael Ford, who's also a graduate of the same high school as me, which is Cass Tech, is also doing great work. Tiffany Brown is doing great with young girls, talking about architecture. Those two people are doing amazing things. Brian Lee down in New Orleans doing amazing things in that regard. So those people are engaging in this sort of back end, front end engagement, and they're trusting in their principled approach, using that in order to achieve their goal in the end. Sometimes it's just the only way to do it. There may be a question on this later. Okay, so we're going to take another break. It's by my clock, it's 10 minutes to the hour. And I guess I'll be wrapping up at about 20 after. So we're going to take 10 minutes for this one. And here's the next one. And this one's identify the most important concerns and issues within your field related to workplace conditions. So this one has to do with us working, as I said at the beginning, us working together versus us in the community and society versus sharing and leading. This one has to do with us and working with each other. So the major issues in working in the workplace, pay equity, microaggression, advancement, promotion, or any other thing that's related to, how we work with each other and our clients and the contractors and things like that, that are basically people-based. Things that went well or went bad. Things that, I should say, things that are concerns, things that are issues in order for us to reach our full potential in our profession and help work with our clients and achieve the excellence in the products that we produce. So the clock is ticking. If you could go ahead and start doing that right now in the chat, place your ideas in the chat, and we'll take a look at that. So we'll start talking again at exactly at 4 o'clock. Wow, there's a lot. Okay, so we can wrap up. I think I've run out of cards. I wonder if I have to go to Digital Office Max to get some more Post-its here. Okay, that's good. 1, 2, 3, 4 times 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 24 and 25, 26. There's about 30 responses again. So there's a lot here as well. And yeah, so I'm gonna ask, for the people who wrote in, is anyone, so Lauren, can they unmute and speak?
Yes, if somebody would like to speak, yeah, raise your hand or indicate in the chat box, and I can try and unmute you for a bit so you can speak.
Thank you. So rather than, I'm not going to call on anyone because that wouldn't be fair. Is anyone who wrote something here want to expand on that and just talk about it a little bit? Raise your hand, please, and just share with us a bit. Don't be, this is just an open conversation here. And I know someone in here said that it's hard to talk about, so that's why I kind of said that. So anybody here want to talk more about singular voices as a design expert, or dismissive of new ideas, or understanding the playing field is not level? Fear of having uncomfortable conversations? Lack of positive strokes? Okay, Wendy, can I pick on you? If you can unmute Wendy. Valuing one type of work or another. Maybe Wendy can't hear us. Okay.
Yeah, I got it. It just took me a second. I think not valuing all work that a company does is to the detriment of the employees. So for instance, if one type of work is flashier, more exciting, makes more money, and the type of work that isn't as flashy or doesn't make as much money is less valued, or the person that doesn't do a lot of marketing is less valued and has fewer opportunities for promotion than the person that is a technical expert. And where would we be without our technical experts? They should have the same, not the same career path, but opportunities to succeed and be at the top of their profession.
Yeah, I think some people refer this to true value of an employee, that since everyone does something different, you can't really rank them always the same way. It's the value of the work they bring. It should be valued, what they bring to the workplace, and celebrated, not to the fact that we don't do the same thing. So that's what I've heard about that. So Anyone else want to jump in? Okay. Thank you very much for participating in that. So let's go on a little bit. So the next thing is closeout. After all this is done, and I learned this one just in my experience in project management, is to always close the project out. It just can't stop working on it and walk away. It has to be an orderly process. So you want to collect all the data that you've done. You want to report progress back to constituents and their leaders. And you want to examine lessons learned and best practices. Document results if you can. So sometimes people will actually publish their results. AI has done that. And then here's a bold here. Celebrate the successes. There's a lot of anxiety going on for the last 4 years, certainly this year. When something really positive happens and we actually get somewhere, I heard someone refer to this as when someone opens the door, walk through it. No matter what we've been through, if you're looking for something to happen and someone opens that door, walk through it. Then celebrate those successes. We need to make as many of those as we can, and there's going to be bumpy roads ahead. But we can make things happen. Already, you have 50 ideas on 2 different topics. So already the process is definitely there, the energy there, and the passion is there. It's just a matter of organizing it and making a plan and making it happen. Once you've done this, also close out, go back and review the things that are parked and things that are not done yet, and try again. Add new items, add those items back that were parked, and continue the process. Okay, so now I'm going to get more into, Lauren, I just want to double check on how's our time.
We're good. We've got about 25 minutes left.
Okay.
So you take all the time you need. Okay,
thank you. All right, so we did a major initiative in the time I was there for about 6 years, and it was really divided up into the items on the left here. That's actually only about probably half of them, but these are the ones I wanted to talk about today. The last one being something I'm working on right now, but diversity survey was one of the first things I did when I got there. There's something that we do probably in your organization, in your conference or your convention, you do something where people propose resolutions. There's a process for that. It's very formal, sort of legal language, but it's a formal way to articulate one's grievances or requests or celebrations or any matter, and it's formalized in something called a resolution. So Resolution 15.1 was in 2015. I'll talk about that. Then there's the Equity Commission, and then the AI Guides for Equitable Practice. And so I'll talk about each of those. So in the initiative under diversity survey, the first thing we need to do is research. So we wanted to look at these areas: work-life balance, factors impacting representation of minorities, building the pipeline through schools, examine factors impacting minorities, reasons for leaving the field, and job satisfaction. So those were the primary things we were really trying to look at in architecture. So whenever we're developing a survey, I would definitely not recommend rushing to an online company that does that and just jumping in. To be sincere in what I talked about earlier about being authentic, it's important to do a little research, consult with some people that you know. Sometimes the local university will help you pro bono or make it part of their class. Get some background on what research surveys really are and how they work and how they sometimes can go wrong. One of the things that's not done very often is how we actually create the questions. So sometimes one person will create the questions, and that's not really a great methodology. You could use focus groups, phone surveys, meetings where you invite the community. There's lots of ways to do that. And the difference really in just collecting issues is that when you create a group like that, you're getting information that helps you create the questions. So therefore the questions are relevant. So you're just not creating the questions, you're actually going to the people you're going to question and asking them to create them. So it actually makes it more relevant and on topic. So you want to develop diverse participation lists to create, to prevent bias, prevent bias basically. So in other words, the only way I could describe this is sort of, if you want to do a survey on Star Trek versus Star Wars, then you're not going to do a survey by asking only the people who like Star Trek. So, I mean, you can see how that can go wrong. So there's a little bit of background work that has to be done in order to de-bias the participation. So something needs to be done there. Avoid using social media, because social media creates something what we call self-selection. So if 5 of my friends did the survey and I share it with 10 of my other friends and they share it with 10 of their friends, then what happens, you get a common theme of like-mindedness, and they will all answer the question the same way, and it kind of destroys the survey in a sense of its unbiased desire to have an unbiased result. So many people I work with tell me never to use social media to drive a survey, a serious survey. And so you also want to avoid bias in the questioning, and you don't want to have a leading question. So you don't want to say something like, there is a lack of pay equity in your office. How do you feel about that? You know, obviously you're going to ask a question that says something like, what are the major concerns about pay in your office? So you ask them a broader question that gets an answer that tells you more information about what's actually happening, rather than assume we know the answer and then incorporate the answer into the question. So that's something we want to try to avoid. So constituent input is critical to the formation of relevance in questions. All right, so let's look at the next item that happened when I was there. Was in 2015, we received the resolution 15-1. And in that, just like I talked about in SMART goals and objectives, they actually did this very well. They did clearly state the issue within the resolution. Again, it's a very formal document. Identify conditions, in this case, identify conditions of women and minorities participating in the field. That was one of the main topics. They charged to create a recommendation. It's important to have an ask when this happens. It has to be an ask. It just cannot be a complaint. It has to be, what do we want to see changed, and be specific. Request measurable. They actually did that. And the expectations of a period, the timeliness. They want to know how timely it would be, and they asked for a report every year for the next 2 or 3 years. They want to know what happened in 6 months, what happened in 12 months, what's going to happen in 18 months. They wanted a periodic report. And so, to quote one section, is they wanted to utilize metric-driven knowledge, collaborative discussion, and definitive action to develop specific recommendations that will lead to equitable practices, investing in diversity that mirrors society at large within all levels of the Institute, academia, and the profession of architecture. So it's broad, it's the belief, it's specific, it's basically the gist of, there's about 5 other things they asked for, but mostly it was that. So when we received it, they asked to create a commission, and we collected 14 members of the AIA, and my recommendation is to enact a diversity selection process, diversity by ethnicity, race, gender identity, region, urban, rural, parts of the state, everything you can think of, men, women, all those things need to be taken into account whenever you create something like this, because we need to hear all voices and we want it to be fair. So we had 14 people. I was involved in actually selecting people from every state or every region of the country, someone from the West, someone from the South, someone from Boston, someone from LA, someone from a small town in Kansas City, someone from Houston. So we basically did our best to make it as diverse as possible. Different ages, I should also say. There were young people in the room, emerging professionals, as we refer to them, were involved as well. So develop the rules of the road is really important, establishing decorum, dignity, and respect. Once you get that out of the way, you're well on the way of having a good facilitation process that talks about these difficult topics and hopefully will lead to solutions. And then use sound facilitation process. So from that, we listened to all ideas, identified categories, which ended up being education, education, licensure, just some of the things, but they also can be in the community, like talked about community retail as being one. What about housing is a really big one. Housing could be one in the world that we're talking about here today. And place all ideas on the placard. That's what I tried to do just now. And then group ideas, we did group ideas and we came up with 5 categories. So I talked about that. So that actually happened. And they ended up being these main ideas, which I'm going to show you, but we had ideas in terms, we called them keystones. That were our categories are called keystones. We did priority, we established SMART goals, we did projected outcomes, aspirations, and then we also looked at budget, because some of these things did cost money, and so we had to look at that. But that's at the bottom, you notice. So that's something that we want to consider, but it wasn't a driving force. So I am sharing with you today the actual placards, doing it in the manual way, in the analog way. I showed you doing it digital now, which is, if I had that digital tool then I would have done that, and we could have done the conference virtually, because that's just the world we live in right now. We have to be inventive about how do we convene now? How do we share ideas? Well, we're going to have to use some different kind of technologies to do that. So you can see here a variety of on the left here is it's going to annotate here. On the left here, oops. Okay, so my annotate's not going to work. That happens sometimes. So on the left here is the topic, and then in this darker gray area are the SMART goal considerations. We talked about timeliness and measuring and description, being specific. Then we have projected outcomes. We had aspirations. Someone added that they want to know, what are we aspiring? And someone wrote, I am proud to be a member. And that's what their aspiration was. And we talked about budget. We only just did it by dollar sign. So it's either $1 or $2. This one here is number 3 is a $4 item. And I think that was to tell our stories. And I'll talk about what that meant. This one had to do with marketing and public relations. I'll just also say that in this particular topic is really important in associations, I feel, because when you're in membership or you're in a community, this is a community of landscape architects, and it's an amazing community of people. There's all kinds of exchange of ideas, and you know, there's a lot to gain in that. When you have a website, just simply something like a website, what does your website show? It should show diversity. It should show the people that are actually in it. And you'd be surprised. I know this sounds really simple, but you'd be surprised at how many organizations don't do that. They may actually be a diverse organization, but they don't show it on their website. And so what does that do? It discourages people from joining. They don't want to join when they don't see people like themselves. And that's how important that was. I'm really proud of this one because we actually helped make a lot of changes. And ultimately what happened is marketing began to send me documents they were putting on the web or they were producing, and they were asking, what do you think? Does this show diversity? And that's how I think we turned the corner, and I think that was really positive. This one was actually on education and career development, so there was a lot done on this one. Things like scholarship, grant programs was mentioned on here, support for intern development program. We have that. I'm not sure if you have that in landscape, but there's a program or internship that has to be done. And so, and then also I just want to say here in these yellow triangles, we actually turned them yellow. We turned them diagonally so we wouldn't forget, but these are the rankings. So actually, if you look at number 1 here is EDI training, or someone put this down as unconscious bias training. And that became the number. This is not my selection. This is the group selection. They said that was the number 1 concern, and ended up being, ended up in the implementation plan ultimately. This one was on leadership development, and this one is on workplace. One of the suggestions is to have a firm self-assessment tool. So you create a tool that has that each firm could assess whether or not they have a diverse equity, justice, and diverse environment in their workplace, and it would give them tools on how to do that. So that was something that they'll rank number 2 in that list. And that was one way to do that. Another one is design excellence. Kind of hard to pin down exactly, other than to say, actually, I didn't bring this topic in. Someone out of the blue said, we need to talk about design excellence in relevance to diversity and inclusion. And what they really meant is that recognition, or how do you define excellence? And Wendy talked a little bit about that. So this became a real topic, and it's a difficult one to measure, certainly, but that didn't deter us from continuing the process on this one. So that's kind of a firsthand look of what happened in that one. So we did an impact analysis, and we want to understand the importance of which proposal had the most impact. We prioritized, as I said, by putting in a yellow sticker or number 1 or 2. We organized issues by theme. We did do that, and we parked a few. So actually, we ended up with 31. We went from about 100 to 30, and then we ended up with a smaller number than that, which ended up being about 10. Now, in that process, I just wanted to point out that it's also important to decide by consensus. This is really critical in order to maintain decorum and fairness. You should avoid voting whenever possible, and embrace deliberations and conversation. And as a last resort, I always use this tactic called understanding the tactic of least objection negotiation, which means if you're down to 10% of a disagreement, then you would ask people to convey their understanding as what is the least objectionable path. And sometimes it will get you to a consensus without them feeling they have to advocate for a particular point that they're not certain about. So I've actually only had to use that a couple of times, but sometimes it's necessary to avoid an impasse and to maintain a consensus without voting. And then also remember that we did use the transitive approach to talk about things like scholarship, because that's something we can't track in the short term. We can only track it in the long term. So we use the transitive approach. And we ended up with these keystones. And so again, we talked about marketing, excellent in architecture. So marketing was one. Again, the solution, or the crux of the theme was the leadership development, strongly restating the AI commitment to diversity. So essentially it was asking the Institute to look through the lens of EDI when making decisions. So when you're making a major decision in your group, your company, your family, your whatever it is, what is it through the lens of equity, diversity, inclusion, and justice? What is that? Marketing and branding I talked about. Do we show what we want to represent? Someone who's really interested in diversity want to be part of our group because they see it in our group, in our leadership, in our membership, in our activities. Excellent architecture, recognizing variety of ways people contribute, not just always the best looking or the cheapest or whatever. There's many ways to evaluate what is excellence. Education is really important. firms and workplace. We talked about that today, and then leadership as well. So I'm going to actually, I think we're getting close to the end, so I'm going to skip this one because we're going to get close to the bottom of the hour. And then I'll just kind of jump into what the outcomes were for this. And because you're probably want to know, well, what happened? Well, as I said, we came up with 9 of the 30. We parked the other 9 or 10. We parked the other 20. And we decided to do 3 a year for the next 3 years. We could fund them. We could make it achievable, more realistic, and hope for a better outcome. So we published an annual report describing the state of the Institute. And that was the first order of business, so that the board of directors would have something they could refer to understand where the Institute was. So we provide them with information on a regular basis. So they could see if they were making decisions and they wanted to see through the lens of EDI, and they should, then they would have information and data in order to support that. So that was our job to make sure we got that to them, and we did that. We launched an anti-harassment and prevention resource on the web page, and one of them was called Women's Leadership Edge, and we actually contracted with a university in California, and then they provided lawyers and all these people who provided free advice online, and that was hugely successful, and actually I think it just ended like within the last couple of months. One of the biggest things we did, the project we took on, was Guides for Equitable Practice. And I'll talk a little bit more in detail about that one. We also obtained demographic information on awards. So we knew what the demographics of our award winners were to see if there's equitable distribution of awards going on. We established a K through 12 department from scratch. It had been there 20 years previous, but we resurrected it. We created a committee. We started engaging in programs. We started recognizing all the amazing work done in chapters, just like ASLA, Michigan chapter does amazing work. Other chapters around the country might want to see how you're doing it. How would they know what you're doing? So we created a document that talked about as many K through 12 projects that were going on in the country, and then we published that so that each chapter could contact those people, and they could also see the outline of what their programs were. So they didn't have to create their programs from scratch. And that was, I thought, a very successful document able to do that. Then we also assist the Institute in diverse content and publications in the website, and that was the other thing we did. So the biggest one was the Guides for Equitable Practice. Now, this document was made for architects, but other people use it. It's definitely a good read for your group if you're thinking about what good process is in EDI. And this book covers cultural competency, workplace culture, compensation, recruitment and retention, negotiations, building relationships with people, managing a career, assessing and measuring your progress, so that's in there, and also engaging communities, which is more has to do with how our actions affect the community and society. That's in there also. And in that document, it's not the kind of thing you would read. You're going to go home and read the whole 300 pages, about 300 pages, but it has tools in it to help with the conversation in certain situations. So it talks about the definitions on the left here, and then it talks about how to assess what's going on currently. It tells you ideas on how to act. It gives you examples, and then it also gives you conversation pieces called consider. So it talks about certain scenarios and then gives you a clue about how to deal with those scenarios and how to discuss them. So it's a good guide on that. It just basically is done. It's actually published on the website, which is actually down below here. And you can download that and use that. Anybody can use it. Other design arts people, I understand, but use it. So that's kind of those major elements regarding both that, and I just want to have one slide to talk about. I'm about to engage in this again, except I'm working with young people. And so I really believe in them and their contribution to the future. And we're going to start our first chapter of NOMA, which is National Organization of Minority Architects, and it's the students chapter. And we're going to do that at University of Arizona starting in mid-October. And the first thing I'm going to do is establish a governance model. And I know it's going to probably twist them around. They're going to want to get right into the issues. But one of the things I have to express to them is that we really want this organization to last. We don't want it to start one year and die the next year. So we want to elect officers. They have a certain term. There's an informal board of directors. There's probably going to be a treasurer and a secretary, you know. So these are the things I'm going to help work with them in getting this organization for them off the ground. And then we're going to talk about, if you've probably paid any attention, some of you in the room who are in academia know that after the George Floyd incident, we've been receiving a lot of information from our students about where they think we should be in academia in regards to equity, diversity, inclusion, and it's well documented. And we actually had a retreat in our university where we read through every one of them, and then we're basically going to try to address them one way or another, and we're going to talk about them in our first NOMA meeting. And if we're never going to get through it in one meeting, we're going to have to take 5 meetings, and we're going to go through them one and one, and we're going to try to see how we can address it. We're not going to ignore it. Some of them are really hard, some of them are already done, and some are very easy. So we just need to work through it one by one and see what's going on. We're going to talk about actions and strategies, and we're going to talk about scholarships a lot because there's scholarships for students as well as design competitions is another big one. But one of my favorites is to talk about resilience, and resilience is one personal thing for me as students is how to be resilient in the difficulties in being in architecture school. The resilience is working with other students who are your allies to help get you through school, forming great relationships that way and working together. Resilience is what happens in a recession in the future and how you make your career resilient. How do you deal with adversity and that's part of resilience. All kinds of things about how to manage the difficulties in design arts and all the things that come, deadlines and all kinds of things that we all know that are part of our profession and every day, and getting them on track to work together and communicate together is actually going to make that, I think, a lot smoother process. So I believe that is just in wrap up. There's one slide here just to wrap up again. So create a vision, collect data and research, identify issues and listen, establish goals and analyze, plan action, important to plan, and implement, measure, measure, measure. And then don't forget to celebrate the successes because there will be some. Have a positive outlook and don't give up. So thank you very much. I think that kind of wraps up the things we've been working on and the things that we all are thinking about, and be positive, be passionate, and keep working on it.
Well, thank you, Damon. That was fantastic. I know we're up against it here, but I think if we can just take a minute or two, there is a question that was submitted in the Q&A. This came from Leslie Tom. It says, how do you communicate / document this process? I know this came a little bit earlier in the presentation, Damon, so maybe you've touched on it a little bit, but if you want to address that.
Great question. So when we worked in our situation, we actually hired a social scientist. Her name is Dr. Shirley Davis, and she's now in the design arts doing work all over the country. She works with AI chapters. She works with AI National, so she's our ally in social sciences, and there are a couple others. There's one in Michigan, actually. when we contracted with them, they are responsible for taking that slide with all the Post-it notes on them, and then they go back and they have a recorder, they write all those things down, they put them in the categories, and they send us a written document as a sort of report back on what happened in the meeting. Then in the case of the Equity Commission, we had 3 meetings. They were in different cities. One was in Houston, one was in Miami, and one was in Washington, D.C. And each time we went to the next meeting, we took the previous document and we just moved the ball forward. We would narrow things down, get them down. So now, if you're in a volunteer organization, we were fortunate enough to actually fund a facilitator and to do that. But if you were doing it yourself, then you basically create a volunteer corps to take on all those responsibilities. So I just did this in the retreat we did at University of Arizona, where we had everyone volunteer for different tasks. One person's the recorder, one person's driving the Zoom meetings, one person's doing the concept board you saw me do, one person's writing and report it there. You just assign all these different tasks to different people. And you can actually get that done. I don't want you to think that, you know, you have to hire somebody to do these. If you can record everything you're doing and keep the process moving, barrel it down to your final objectives, get an implementation process created and a plan, assign someone to each item, have a report back process, and you can still do this. So you don't have to always hire someone to do it, but hiring is nice. If you can hire someone, it's a good idea too.
Well, thank you, Damon, so much for your time. I certainly took a ton from this. I'm sure a lot of the other participants did as well. So we just can't thank you enough. We're honored that you were willing to come in and speak to us tonight. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Good luck, everyone.
Yeah, and just to finally wrap up, we want to thank our sponsors again one last time: Victor Stanley, Landscape Forms, Unilock, Inova, Oaks Concrete Products, and Rainbird Corporation. We'd also like to thank the Michigan ASLA Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee for planning the event and the Michigan chapter for hosting it. And those of you that are not aware or maybe just learning more about the DEI committee through Michigan ASLA, we ask that you follow us on Instagram at Michigan ASLA. Check out our website, michiganasla.org. You can learn more about the committee on the webpage. Stephanie and I are the co-chairs, and our contact information is on there. So if you're interested in hearing more about what we're doing or becoming a part of the committee, we would love to have you. We have lots of exciting things happening and more of these types of events in store as well. So we look forward to seeing you on the next one. Last reminder, there is the session quiz that's been posted in the chat. So you will need to do that in order to get the CEUs. And finally, we have our next webinar event next Friday. It's ADA enforcement trends, playgrounds, sports fields, and more. Registration is available on the website, michiganasla.org. You can also find any other future events there. So with that, thanks again, Damon. Thanks again to all our participants. We wish you all a good evening and a good weekend.